the ability to reframe and see the light in the darkness, and learning the life lesson of Yosef. The ability to reframe means looking at a situation an occurrence, an event that you don't like, and learning how to look at it differently. To take the event and reinterpret the event and not view it in the same painful, tragic way that will affect your future. That was one of the goals of 20th century psychologists, whether it's Viktor Frankl, founder of logotherapy and Man's Search for Meaning, Aaron Beck, School of Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, or to this day, Martin Seligman at the School of Positive Psychology, University of Pennsylvania. To find meaning in tragedy, to find light in the darkness, so that the events that have occurred that you don't like will not plague you in the future, thereby changing the past as you can change the future. Because if you can reinterpret the past, we say you can't change the past, but if you change how you understand the past, an event that occurred that you didn't like, a past performance, and change what it means and how you can understand and how you can learn from it, how you can teach others, it can change your future. And the story of Yosef contains this, where he's initially sold into slavery. He's sent into slavery in Egypt by his brothers who hated him and wanted to kill him, but instead just decided to sell him into slavery and then lied to their father about what happened to him. He's in the it says he's in the house of Potiphar, and he's accused of he doesn't respond to her sexual advances, and she accuses him of trying to sexually assault him, and Joseph runs away. He's eventually imprisoned, and while he's in the jail, still continuing to see, still being a light in the darkness, instead of just becoming insular and withdrawing from everyone else, getting himself into trouble. Being in an ancient prison in Egypt, I don't imagine is like a modern day prison. I think it's probably a little more than a hole with the bars on the top of it. But while he's in there, he decides to start interpreting dreams for people. I don't know if I would have done that if I was falsely imprisoned after being sold into sold into slavery by my brothers. I don't know if I would be wanting to interact with anybody. Who knows what would happen? But because of his ability to stay on track, stay on the right path, he interprets the dreams of two people that were in the jail. It's later discovered that Joseph can interpret dreams. And the fact that he can interpret dreams causes him to get sprung from prison. They shave him, they shower him, they put on new clothes, put some cologne on him, I imagine, and present him in front of Pharaoh, whose dreams he then interprets. He then interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and he predicts that there's going to be a famine in Egypt. And the Pharaoh agrees with this and puts Joseph in charge of over the entire country, second only to the Pharaoh. He becomes the viceroy. Now in one day, this is a life lesson for us too, in one day he goes from being a prisoner in the ancient world to being number two in the strongest empire in the entire world. So how's that for a drastic change in your life? It's similar to the story of Natan Sharansky, where he's in a Russian Soviet prison, and then later that day he's freed, and he eventually ends up at the Western Wall in Israel, to go from being a political prisoner to being at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Unbelievable thing. Joseph is in a prison, and who knows when he's getting out. And then in the same day, he becomes the viceroy of the Pharaoh in Egypt. He predicts there's going to be a famine, and the famine comes. Before the famine comes, he directs everyone to gather up food, gather up grain in Egypt, so that when the famine comes, there will be food. And eventually the famine comes, and because of Joseph's advice to gather up food, there is food to eat in Egypt. And the word spreads to the land of Canaan, where his brothers are living, and eventually they have to come to Egypt. And when they come to Egypt, they're presented to this man, Joseph, who conceals his identity. He's wearing an Egyptian outfit. He has an interpreter. He has an Egyptian name. He conceals his identity, but eventually he discloses that he is in fact Joseph. He says to them, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" And then later on, a few verses later, he tells them not to worry. He says he doesn't bear a grudge for what happened. He says, "It wasn't you who sent me here. It was the Almighty who sent me here. He sent me here so I could interpret the dreams of the Pharaoh, so that there would be food for when there was a famine in the land of Canaan." And that's exactly what happened. So it wasn't you that sent me here. You were just used as a vehicle to bring about what the Almighty wanted. And that is a very impressive way of reinterpreting or reframing the events. He could have said, he could have had these guys executed, or at the very least he could have punched one of them in the nose, but he didn't. He looked at it as if this is what was supposed to happen. He reinterpreted it, reframed it that way, thereby changing his past to make his future better, and then explains this to his brothers. So not only does he reframe his own past and then changes his future, but he does it for his brothers, who must have some amount of guilt by this point by knowing that they sold their brother. He's been gone for 22 years. They lied to their father. Now they find out he's alive. And the way Joseph explains it to his brothers, it reinterprets what they did to themselves, reinterprets it for himself, reframes it for himself. So another message that I think is important for the story is this, is that Joseph always stayed on the right track. He's sent to Egypt to be a slave, but he could have given in to the advances of the woman that he was living with, whose house he was a slave in, but he didn't. And then when he was put in prison, he could have become insular, he could have been withdrawn, but he didn't. It's as if Joseph brings light in the darkness. Maybe he knew that eventually he would get out of the jail, that he would interpret the dreams, there would be food because of his interpretation of the dreams, and that he would save his brothers. So he saw the end destination, so it enabled him to lead a virtuous life while still in the jail, interpreting dreams for the butcher and the baker, which then eventually the word of that spreads to the Egyptians, to the hierarchy, and then to Pharaoh, and then they eventually take him out of the jail. And because he does this good service in the jail by interpreting dreams for other people to give them some insight, he brings light in the darkness, the way the Hanukkah menorah does. And I put the beautiful picture of my family from our Hanukkah celebration, where the candles light up the room, because it only takes a small amount of light to light up a very dark room. And the fact that Joseph stayed on the right track, seeing his future, seeing that he still had not fulfilled his goal, that he still hadn't gotten out of jail, interpreted the dreams, enabled there to be food in Egypt so that his brothers and father and all of their family members could come to Egypt and have food. That hadn't happened yet. So he stayed on the right path, didn't get himself into trouble, didn't become withdrawn, continued to give as opposed to take. He continued to give, and because he gave, because he interpreted those dreams, he was given the opportunity to interpret the dreams for Pharaoh, enabling him to become the viceroy of Egypt, number 2 in the land, implementing his policies so that there would be food in Egypt, so that when his brothers and his father and their relatives would need food, there would be food. And he viewed it as this is what had to happen. Not that the brothers did something wrong, but the brothers did simply what the Almighty wanted them to do, so that there would eventually be food years and years, 22 years later, all because of what had happened. A weird, like kind of convoluted way of reinterpreting these events, but what a beautiful way of reinterpreting it, of reframing it. And this is a lesson for all of us. When bad events happen, we can look at it as God hates us, I'm stupid, this is just the way it's always going to be, or let's look at this event, let's isolate it. It doesn't necessarily reflect on me personally. It may not have it may not affect my future. It doesn't mean that my whole life is messed up. Let's isolate it rather than expanding it to, I messed up. I mess up a lot. I've messed up a lot for a long time. I hurt people. I've always hurt people. I'm probably always going to hurt people. Maybe it would be better if I just wasn't even fill in the blank. The ability to reinterpret bad events, painful events, is essential. The ability to reframe them enables us to change our past, which can then change our future. Thank you for watching.